This lesson discusses updating data in a table. Topics include: how do you update data in a table using PHP? What happens when you try to update a row where there is a constraint? How do you update purchases for a user, for example, when you do not know the user ID? Looking at the first code example, this is an example of a simple update. We identify the MySQL database connection information on lines 6, 8, and 10. On line 13 is the user that we wish to update. On lines 17 through 22 is an array of data which will be supplied during the execution phase of the prepared statement. On line 27, we set up the database connection using exception error mode checking. On line 30 is the SQL statement. As you have seen in other lessons, we use placeholders in place of the actual values, which will be supplied during the execution phase. On line 35, we prepare the statement. On line 38, we execute the prepared statement using the data which was identified on line 17. You'll notice that the array is an associative array where the keys represent the placeholders and the values are the values which will be sent to the database during the execution phase. As has been mentioned in previous lessons, this provides several advantages. Number one, it ensures that the values are properly quoted according to the requirements of the database. Database quoting is important to maintain the integrity of the SQL statement. The second advantage is that the prepared statement helps protect against potential SQL injection attacks. You'll notice on line 17 that we are modifying the primary key, which is the user ID. We are going to attempt to change this to a value of 152. If we look now at the database by moving to the PHPMyAdmin screen, we've selected the class database and the table users. The highest user ID in this particular table is 154. You'll notice that 152 already exists. Therefore, if we attempt to make the update, we should end up with an error. Moving now to the working files, executing the first example, we'll notice that an error has been reported, integrity constraint violation. This is because we are attempting to modify the primary key, which must have unique values. We would receive a similar message if we are attempting to modify a column which has a unique index associated with it. Going back to the database, you'll notice that there is no value for 153. So if we attempt to make a change to 153, we should be successful. We'll save the program, go back to the database. Before we make the change, notice the purchases table. The purchases table has a relationship established with the users table. The relationship is established on the user ID column. Therefore, if we make a change to the parent table users, this should then be reflected in the child table purchases, and the ID should be modified, assuming that the relationship is set for onUpdate cascade. We can check this by going to Structure, going to Relation View, and verifying that we do have onUpdate cascade. We now go back to the working files and execute the program. The result came back as 1, which simply means it was a positive result. Looking back at the purchases table, you can see that the new ID number is now 153. Going back to the users table, we can see that the user ID for the user Truman Capote has been changed to 153, as well as the address, city, and postal code. Looking now at the second code example, the question arises, how do you apply changes to a child table if you only know certain information from the parent table? In this example, the parent table is the users table. The child table is the purchases table. We know the name of the user, but not the ID number, and we wish to apply a discount to the purchases for this specific user. This is a very common operation on websites which involve e-commerce operations. On lines 6, 8, and 10, as usual, the standard MySQL connection parameters. On line 13 is the name of the user that we wish to update. On line 16 is the discount. We establish the PDO connection using error checking. And then on line 24, 25, and 26, we prepare an SQL statement and we execute it in order to retrieve the user ID from the users table. This is an operation which is known as a lookup. So we are doing a lookup on the users table, knowing the name in an attempt to find the ID. The return value should be an array where the only key is user ID. On line 29, we perform a fetch and we specify that we wish to return an associative array. On line 32 is an if statement. This is known as a safety check. We check first to make sure that the return value is what we think it is. If it is, we perform the update operation. Otherwise, we would most likely redirect to some other web page. Notice the parameters. We check to see if lookup exists. We then verify that it is an array by using the isArray function. Logical AND. We then verify that there are values in the array by using the count function and verifying that the number of lines in the array is greater than 0. On lines 35 through 39, as well as 49 through 51, we do a before and after check on the sum. Notice we are using the alias letter S. So we select the sum of the sale price as S from purchases, where the user ID is the user ID that we have just retrieved from the lookup. We then prepare and execute the statement. On lines 49, we execute it again after the update. This is oftentimes used for verification purposes. On line 42 is the update statement. Notice that we are taking the current sale price and applying the discount by multiplying a factor of 0.8. We then apply a where clause where the user ID is the user ID which was obtained as part of the lookup. The net result then will be the sale prices reduced by 20%. Moving now to the database, if we look at the purchases table, you'll notice that the sale price is currently set at 400, 300, 200, and 100 for quantities of 10 on these various products. If we move now to our working files and execute the second example, you will see that the lookup returned an array with the user ID of 153, which was the new ID which we had modified in the earlier example. The sum of the sale prices before the discount was 1,000. The update was successful, as we can see by a return value of 1. The sum after the discount is now 800, which represents a reduction of 20%. Moving back to the purchases table, we refresh, have a look at the sales, and you'll notice that they have all been reduced by 20%. In review, how do you update data in a table using PHP? You would use the standard procedure which has been outlined in other lessons. Create the PDO object using the appropriate MySQL connection parameters. Number 2, formulate the SQL statement using placeholders. Number 3, send the prepared statement to the server using the prepare command. This produces a PDO statement object. Number 4, execute the statement using the execute command off of the statement object, supplying the appropriate values, which will then take the place of the placeholders. What happens when you try to update a row where there is a constraint? If there is a relationship and the constraint is set to on update cascade, changes will be reflected in the child table. If you attempt to modify a column containing a primary key or a unique index, and the value that you supply is not unique, you will also return an integrity constraint error message. How do you update purchases for a user when you do not know the user ID? You would use the select SQL statement to do a lookup to find the ID. You would store the ID in a variable and then use the update command on the purchases table to perform the actual operation. This concludes our discussion of updating data in a table.